The night air of the alien market was heavy with smoke and fear. Colored lights flashed across cracked walls, and metal cages lined the stage. Each cage held something alive, something broken. Traders shouted numbers while crowds pushed forward with greedy eyes. Inside one small glass cage stood a young alien girl. Her skin shimmered faintly under the cold light, like moonlit water chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles. Tight enough to leave marks, her eyes stayed low. Fixed on the dirty floor, she did not move. Not even when the crowd jeered at her. They called her a pleasure animal. A thing made only for use, their laughter echoed like claws scratching metal. The auctioneer slammed his staff on the platform and called for silence. He announced her as the final prize of the night. Her name had been taken from her long ago. She was given only a number now, carved into the tag at her neck. The crowd leaned closer as the auction began. One man offered a handful of credit chips. Another shouted twice as much. Their voices rose like a storm. The girl stayed still, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. She had been sold before. Passed from hand to hand each time, it had meant pain. She waited for it again then. From the back of the hall, a calm voice spoke. It was soft, but it cut through the chaos. All heads turned. A human stood there, older, broad-shouldered. With silver at his temples, he wore a simple coat and carried no weapon. His eyes were steady. Not hungry like the others, he named his price. The hall fell silent. It was far more than anyone expected. The auctioneer blinked, then slammed his staff again. "Sold?" he declared. The crowd muttered with shock as the man walked forward. He moved with slow purpose, not even looking at the others. The girl did not raise her head. She waited for the strike, for the leash, for the cruel hands she knew would follow, but none came. He stopped in front of her cage instead of unlocking the collar first. He shrugged off his coat. The fabric was soft and warm. He wrapped it around her thin shoulders before the chains were even removed. Her eyes flickered in confusion. No one had ever done that. Slaver opened the cage door. The chains clattered to the floor. As they were removed, the girl stepped out slowly, legs shaking. The man held out his hand, not to pull, only to guide. She followed in silence as he led her through the market. The crowd parted around them like water around a stone. Some laughed quietly, calling him a fool. Others watched with wary eyes. Unsettled by his calm, cold night air hit her face as they left the building. For the first time in years, she saw the open sky. It was wide and endless, full of stars that seemed too far to reach. Her steps faltered. The man paused and looked back at her. "You are free to walk," he said gently. The words did not make sense to her. She stared at him, waiting for the trick, but he only nodded once and kept walking. She hurried to catch up, clutching the coat around her body. They reached a small landing pad at the edge of the city. His old ship waited there, lights glowing soft in the dark. He opened the ramp and stood aside so she could board. First she hesitated. She could still run, no one would stop her now, but her feet moved forward on their own. She climbed the ramp and entered the ship. The air inside was warm and smelled like pine wood. He followed behind and closed the hatch. With a soft click, no chains, no orders, only quiet. She stood in the center of the cabin. Staring at him, he met her gaze for the first time. There was no hunger in his eyes, only calm resolve. "You are safe now," he said. Her throat tightened. She did not believe him, but something deep inside her wanted to. The ship cut through the dark between stars, quiet as a drifting leaf. The girl sat in the far corner of the cabin, knees pulled to her chest. She watched the human with wide, unblinking eyes. Every muscle in her body stayed tense, ready to flee. But he did not touch her. He did not even look at her much. He moved about the ship in steady silence, checking controls, pressing buttons, humming softly to himself. Sometimes he glanced at her to make sure she was still there. Then he returned to his work as if she was not a captive, not a prize. The silence felt strange to her. She had known cages filled with noise, hands, orders, pain. Now there was only quiet after hours of travel. The ship landed on a small green world. Tall silver trees surrounded a lone wooden cabin on a grassy cliff. Waves roared far below on dark rocks. Cold wind carried the smell of rain and pine. The human opened the ship door and stepped out first. Then he turned and waited for her to follow. She stood frozen at the ramp. No leash, no command. Just his quiet eyes on hers. At last she stepped down. Bare feet touching real soil. It felt soft and strange. He led her to the cabin and pushed the door open. Warmth rushed out. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The small room smelled of wood smoke and herbs. There was a table, 2 chairs and shelves lined with old books, no cages, no locks. He set a bowl of food on the table. Steam curled up. Carrying the scent of root stew and bread, her stomach twisted with hunger. But she did not move. He did not force her. He simply sat and ate his own meal slowly, saying nothing. After a long time, she crept forward. Her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. She took one small bite, then another. Tears slipped down her cheeks without warning. She wiped them away quickly, afraid he would see, but he only rose and left the room without a word. She finished every drop later. He brought her a blanket, thick and soft. He placed it on a bed in a small side room and pointed gently. "This room is yours," he said. Then he turned off the light and walked away. She stood alone. In the doorway for a long time, her mind spun in confusion. This was not how it worked. Men like him bought girls like her to break them. Not to give them space, not to give them warmth. She crawled into the bed. It was soft. Too soft. She stayed curled on top of the blanket. Ready to run, sleep came slow and restless in the days that followed. He kept a careful distance. Each morning he cooked and left a plate near the door. Then he sat outside on the porch, sipping tea, watching the ocean. She would wait until he was gone before taking the food. Sometimes she peeked out and saw him working. In the garden he dug small holes and placed tiny, green sprouts into the soil. His hands were rough, not from violence but from building things. He spoke very little, only short words when needed. "Food is ready. Stay warm. Be careful of the stairs." No questions about her past, no demands about her future. At night, she heard the storm winds howl outside the cabin. She lay awake under the blanket, listening to the fire crackle. The quiet began to feel heavy, pressing on her chest. It was not the silence of a cage. It was the silence of choice. She did not know how to breathe in it one evening. She found herself standing at the edge of the porch. The forest stretched wide and dark under the stars. The human sat nearby, sharpening an old tool. He glanced at her but said nothing. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he had bought her, why he had not used her. But the words stuck like stones in her throat. Instead, she whispered into the night air. Too soft for him to hear. "Why am I here?" Her voice trembled. It had been so long since she used it. The sound startled even her. He lifted his head slightly, as if he had heard but did not turn. He simply nodded once, slow and thoughtful. Then he set down the tool and walked inside, leaving her alone with the stars. She stayed on the porch long after he left, the cold bit at her bare feet. But for the first time, the chains in her mind felt loose. Morning sunlight spilled across the wooden floor of the cabin. The girl sat at the table, silent as always, watching steam rise from her bowl. The human moved quietly around the room, pouring tea into 2 cups. He set one in front of her and sat down across the table. They ate in silence. Only the crackle of the fire and the wind against the windows made sound. She kept her eyes on the spoon, pretending not to study him. He kept his gaze low, giving her space like he always did. Her chest felt tight. The silence had grown heavier each day. It wrapped around her like invisible chains. Not cruel, just confusing. She had lived her whole life with orders and commands. Now there were none. It made her feel lost. She stared at him and wondered if he saw her as human at all, or if she was still just a thing to him, waiting to be used later. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She set down her spoon. Her hands shook. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her lips parted. "Why?" she whispered. The word was soft, almost broken. It startled her as much as him. He looked up, calm eyes meeting hers. "Why what?" he asked gently. Her throat burned. "Why? Me?" she forced out, voice trembling. "Why buy me if you do nothing to me?" He leaned back in his chair. For a moment he said nothing, only studied her with quiet thought. Then he spoke, because no one deserves to be owned. The words fell like stones into still water. She blinked at him. She had never heard such a thing in her world. You are not property, he continued. You are someone. You should be free. Something cracked inside her. A soft sound escaped her throat, sharp and thin. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, shoved her chair back and turned away. Her hands covered her face. Her shoulders shook. It had been years since she cried. Pain never made her cry, but kindness did. It cut deeper than chains. He did not move from his seat. He did not reach for her. He simply let her cry, silent and patient as stone minutes passed. Her sobs slowed. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve, angry at her own weakness when she turned back. He was gone from the table. Her heart leapt in fear until she saw him near the stove. He was filling a kettle with water. When he returned, he carried a small cup tea. He said softly. She stared at it, then at him. Her hands trembled as she took the cup. It smelled sweet. Like honey and wild leaves. She sipped slowly. Warmth spread through her chest. He smiled. Faint but real. Everyone deserves small comforts, he said. She could not answer. Her voice was still broken from crying. The next morning, she found something new on the table, a small journal. Its cover soft and blank. A simple pen rested on top. For you, he said. You can write your name here, or anything you want. She froze. Her name. She had not spoken it in years. It had been beaten out of her, stripped away. Her hands shook as she touched the book. Words felt like a dangerous thing, but she wanted them again. That night she sat by the fire with the journal on her lap. She wrote slowly, shaping the letters of her name in shaky lines. Tears blurred her vision. She whispered the name under her breath, tasting it again like forgotten fruit. He watched from the doorway, silent, giving her space. Something in her chest loosened when she saw no judgment in his face. The following days brought small changes. She began answering his short questions with short words. Yes, no, okay. Then one evening he showed her how to boil water and steep leaves. She copied his slow motions carefully. Her brow furrowed. He nodded with approval when she poured the tea perfectly. She felt a strange pride spark in her chest. Later, when he thanked her for the cup, she laughed. It was small, quick, and shocked her. Her hand flew to her mouth. Eyes wide, he only smiled again, calm and warm. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling for the first time. Her fear felt thin and breakable, like old glass ready to crack, and in the quiet dark, she whispered her name again. It no longer sounded like a lie. Morning mist wrapped around the cabin like a soft veil. The girl stepped outside, barefoot on the wooden porch. Cold air brushed her skin, carrying the smell of pine and ocean salt. For the first time, she was not afraid of the open world. The human stood in the garden, kneeling by the soil. His hands were dark with earth as he pressed new seeds into the ground. He glanced at her and gave a small nod. No command, no order, just quiet welcome. She walked down the steps slowly. Her feet sank into the damp grass. The ground felt alive under her toes. He handed her a small trowel and pointed at an empty patch beside him. She hesitated. Her fingers curled around the tool like it might bite, but his calm eyes stayed on the soil, not on her, so she knelt. They worked in silence, dig, place, cover, press. The rhythm soothed her racing mind. By the time the sun rose higher, tiny green sprouts stood between them like quiet witnesses. When they finished, he brushed the dirt from his palms. You did well, he said simply. Her chest warmed at the words. She had not heard praise in years. It felt strange, fragile, but good. Inside the cabin, he opened a small chest and pulled out folded clothes. Simple cotton, soft and clean. He placed them on the table in front of her. For you, he said. Her eyes widened. She touched the fabric as if it might vanish. Her old rags smelled of chains, and dark rooms. These smelled of soap and sunlight. She carried them to her room and dressed slowly. When she looked into the cracked mirror, a stranger stared back. No collar, no chains, just a girl in soft clothes with wide, uncertain eyes. That evening, he showed her how to cook. He handed her a knife and vegetables from the garden. She cut them carefully while he stirred the pot on the fire. The smell of warm herbs filled the room. Her hands moved slow but steady, like she was carving a new shape for herself. They ate together at the table. She did not hide in the corner anymore after the meal. She carried her journal outside. She sat under the porch light, writing small words with careful strokes. Each letter made her feel more real. She wrote about the soil between her toes, the smell of tea, the way the fire crackled. She wrote her name many times, shaping it until it looked beautiful later. She wandered beyond the cabin. The forest opened around her like a cathedral. Silver leaves shimmered in the moonlight. The wind whispered through the branches. No one chased her, no one shouted. Her heart pounded with wild fear and wild joy. She ran, just to feel the motion. Her feet struck soft moss and fallen leaves. When she stopped, she was laughing and gasping for breath. Her voice echoed between the trees. It sounded alive. She returned to the cabin long after dark. The human was sitting by the fire, reading a worn book. He looked up and gave her a calm smile. "You're safe," he said. She nodded, breathless, glowing from the run. Then she curled into her blanket and slept deeply. For the first time, days passed and her movements grew freer. She stopped glancing over her shoulder every time the floor creaked. She stopped flinching when he stepped near. She began humming softly while she worked, small tunes she did not remember learning. One morning, she found herself standing at the edge of the cliff. Waves crashed below, sending white spray into the wind. "The horizon stretched forever," she whispered. "I am here." The wind carried her words away, but the sound felt real that night. She sat with him on the porch, stars scattered across the dark sky like sparks. He spoke about the worlds he had seen, quiet stories told like bedtime songs. She listened, head tilted, eyes wide for the first time. She imagined herself among those stars. Her old life felt distant, like a fading shadow at the edge of a warm light. She was learning how to live, not as a thing, not as property, but as someone. Rain hammered the cabin roof like a war drum. The girl sat by the fire, sewing a tear in her sleeve. She hummed a soft tune under her breath, something she had heard from the human. He was outside stacking wood, his coat soaked, his hair silver in the storm. Life had become calm, safe, almost peaceful, but peace does not last forever. She felt it first, a sharp twist in her chest, like cold hands closing around her heart. Then the sound came, engines, distant but rising, cutting through the storm. She froze, her needle slipped from her fingers. Her eyes locked on the window as lights flashed through the trees. The human stepped inside, dripping water across the floor. His face was calm, but his eyes narrowed. He had heard it too. "Stay inside, Ma," he said quietly. She stood. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Who is it?" He did not answer. He just reached for the old pulse rifle mounted. Above the hearth, he checked the charge with practiced hands and stepped out into the rain. The sound grew louder. 2 black skimmers burst from the forest and skidded to a halt near the garden. There, lights cut harsh beams through the mist. 3 figures climbed out, tall and armored in dark metal slavers. Her blood went cold. She knew the symbol on their shoulders, the crimson spiral. They had taken her from her home. They had sold her to cages and chains. The tallest one stepped forward, helmet glinting in the stormlight. His voice carried over the wind. "You have something that belongs to us," he called. The human stood still, rain streaming down his face. "She does not belong to anyone," he said. The slaver laughed. "She is marked property, registered and tagged. Return her and we will leave you alive." The girl stood in the doorway, trembling. Her legs wanted to run, but her heart stayed rooted. The human raised the rifle slowly. "She stays," he said. The slaver's smile faded. "You will die for her," he said. "Then, I will die free," the human replied. Lightning tore the sky. The first shot came like thunder. Blue light hissed past the human's head as he rolled behind the woodpile. He fired back, a sharp burst that slammed one slaver to the ground. The girl gasped and stumbled backward. Fear clawed her chest, but another feeling rose behind it. Fury. They had taken everything from her. They would not take this. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and ran into the rain. The human saw her and shouted, "Stay back." but she ducked behind the garden wall and stayed low. The slavers pushed forward, firing bolts that scorched the soil. The human darted between cover, his rifle flashing. One skimmer exploded in a burst of fire, sending metal spinning across the garden. The leader charged through the smoke. He slammed the human into the mud. They fought hand to hand, boots slipping on the wet ground. The rifle skidded away. The girl lunged. From the shadows, she swung the iron poker. With all her strength, it struck the leader's helmet and cracked it like glass. He roared in pain and staggered back. Human surged up and drove his fist into the slaver's chest. The man fell hard and did not. Rye's silence crashed down. Rain hissed on the wrecked skimmer. Smoke curled into the night. The human stood panting, mud and blood streaking his face. She dropped the poker, her arm shaking. They stared at each other. Breathless, neither spoke. The forest howled around them like it had witnessed something sacred. Finally, he stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was steady, not harsh. "You were brave," he said. Her chest tightened. No one had ever called her that. Her voice was small when she answered, "I did not want them to take you." His eyes softened. "They will come back," he said quietly. "We have to leave." She nodded, fear coiled in her stomach. But she did not look away. Together they gathered what they could carry: food, water, warm clothes. She tucked her journal into her coat like a piece of her soul by the time the sun rose. The cabin stood empty. Their footprints trailed into the dark forest, side by side. The forest thinned into cold stone hills as night fell. The human and the girl moved in silence, their steps quiet on the moss behind them. The cabin was far away, lost in mist and memory. A thin beam of light blinked on the horizon. An old space station floated above the cliffs like a rusted moon. It hung in low orbit, tethered to the rock by thick cables. Broken signs flickered on its outer shell. Once it had been a trade hub. Now it was only a shadow filled with echoes. They climbed a narrow path to the launch pad. The human keyed open the hatch of his ship and they slipped inside. Engines hummed, lifting them into the starless dark. The station grew closer, its metal bones creaking in the void. The girl sat stiff in the co-pilot seat. Clutching her journal, her eyes stayed locked on the station. She had not spoken much since the fight at the cabin, but her mind burned with one thought, He glanced at her, reading her silence. "You do not have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do," she answered quietly. "You are already free here," he said. She shook her head. "Not until they erase me." The words were steady. Her voice was not. The ship docked with a soft clang. They stepped into a dim corridor that smelled of rust and oil. Their boots echoed on metal floors. The station was almost empty. Only a few old droids buzzed in dark corners. She led the way, memory guiding her feet. Her old life had passed through this place once. She would burn its trail away. They reached the central data core. A cracked door slid open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, cables hung like dead vines from the ceiling. A single console flickered weak light. She froze in the doorway. Her hands shook. He touched her shoulder. "We can turn back," he said. She took a deep breath. "No," she whispered. "I want to do this." She stepped to the console. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The old tag at her neck seemed to grow heavier with each breath. Then she began. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Her registry number blinked in red. Property of Crimson Spiral listed as pleasure asset. Transferable. Her stomach turned, her hands moved faster. She dug through the old system, deleting her image, her file, her chains. Her tag number dissolved into static. The console beeped a warning. She pressed one last command. The screen went. Dark silence fell like a curtain. Her knees gave out and she sank to the floor, the weight on her. Chest cracked like thin glass. The human crouched beside her. "It is done," he said softly. She stared at the dead screen. A slow, trembling smile touched her lips. "I am gone from them," she said. Her voice shook. "I am no one's thing anymore." He nodded. "You are yours now." They left the data core and walked back through the hollow station. The air felt lighter around her, like a cage had dissolved. Stars glimmered through broken windows. She lifted her face to them, eyes bright. When they reached the ship, she paused at the ramp. Her feet felt rooted. The world beyond the station was vast and wild. She feared it, but she wanted it. The human stopped beside her. You do not have to know what comes next, he said. You only have to choose it. She looked at him. He stood steady as stone, waiting. She thought of chains clattering to the floor, of soil between her toes, of her name written in soft ink. She lifted her chin. I choose, she said. He gave a small smile. Then let's go home. They boarded. The ship engines roared, shaking dust from the ceiling. The station shrank behind them as they rose into the black. She sat by the window, watching stars streak past. Her heart still raced. But it was not fear. It was freedom, sharp and bright like cold wind in her lungs. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, I am free, and for the first time she believed it. The ship glided through thin clouds as dawn rose on the horizon. Soft gold light spilled across the ocean below. Waves glittered like molten glass as the cabin's old cliff came into view. The girl sat near the window. Her journal clutched tight. Her eyes followed the familiar curve of the land home. The word still felt strange, but it no longer felt impossible. The human sat at the controls, calm and steady. He glanced at her and spoke quietly. You do not have to stay here if you do not want to. She looked at him. I do want to, she said. Her voice carried no fear, only truth. The ship landed with a soft hiss. They stepped onto the damp grass. Mist curled around their legs. Glowing in the morning light, the cabin stood untouched, though rain and wind had scarred its walls. The garden was wild, with weeds. Birdsong echoed from the cliffs. It felt alive. They moved through the cabin together. Dust danced in the air as sunlight touched old wooden shelves. She ran her fingers across the table where she had first spoken her name. Every corner held memories, fear, confusion, laughter. Tears, pieces of her becoming real in the hearth. Bits of ash still lingered. The iron poker lay where she had dropped it after the fight. She picked it up, then set it back gently. It was part of the past now. Later, they stood on the cliff edge. The ocean stretched endless and bright. The wind tangled her hair as she closed her eyes. He stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. You are quiet, he said. I am thinking, she answered. About what? About who I want to be. He smiled faintly. That is a good thing to think about. She opened her eyes and faced him fully. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was steady. I do not want to be your property, she said. I do not want to be your saved thing. He said nothing. He only waited. I want to be beside you, she whispered. By choice. The words shook, but they did not break. He stepped closer, slow and careful. I would like that, he said, only if you are sure. I am sure. For a moment they stood still, only the sea moving around them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. It was simple, carved from pale wood, smooth from years of handling. He held it out to her with both hands. Her breath caught her chest, ached with something too wide for words. I kept it for someone worth keeping, he said softly. Her fingers shook as she took it. She slid it onto her own finger. It fit like it had been waiting. Her eyes burned with tears, but they were not the old tears of fear. They were new, warm, alive. He placed a hand against her cheek. His palm was rough, steady. You are not surviving anymore, he said. You are living. A laugh broke from her lips, soft and bright. She caught his hand and held it against her cheek. I am living, she said. They turned together toward the cabin. He picked up her journal from the porch rail and handed it to her. Write what you want to become, he said. She hugged it to her chest. I will, she said. The sun climbed higher, casting fire on the sea. They walked back inside, their steps side by side. She placed her old collar on the hearth. The metal was cold and dull. Then she set it into the fire. Flames curled around it, hissing. It melted slowly, turning to glowing ash. She watched until nothing remained. The chains were gone outside. The wind carried the scent of flowers from the garden. New green shoots pushed through the soil. She would plant more. She would build more. The world was wide and wild and waiting. But for now, it was enough to stand beside him, not as a rescued creature, not as a possession but as his equal, his chosen, hand in hand. They stepped out onto the porch. The sea roared below. The sky opened above. And together they walked into the new day.